Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with emergency communication strategies in the federal government. With me today on the show are Rear Admiral Ron Hewitt, the Director of the Office of Emergency Communication, Department of Homeland Security, Laurie Flaherty, the Coordinator of the National 911 Program, Department of Transportation, Antwane Johnson, the Director of Integrated Public Alert and Warning Systems Division at DHS-FEMA, Patrick Flynn, the Director, Homeland National Security Programs, Intel Security, Mark McNulty, the Vice President and Senior Director at Motorola Solutions, and Ryan Gillis, the Vice President, Cybersecurity Strategy and Global Policy at Palo Alto Networks. Let's talk about some progress going on in this area. Let's start with Rear Admiral Hewitt. Ron, give us some examples of progress you're making in the areas of emergency communications at the DHS.
Well, good morning, Jim, and thank you for having me on the show today. The Office of Emergency Communications is a fairly new organization in the Department of Homeland Security that was created by the 21st Century Emergency Communications Act of 2006 to help address and resolve the interoperability issues nationwide that are addressed by the 911 report and the Hurricane Katrina after action reports. We released the first National Emergency Communications Plan in 2008 that was developed in partnership with public safety, which consists of law enforcement, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and other emergency responders. The plan was stressed the critical factors of interoperability, which includes governance, standard operating procedures, training and exercises, and the integration of systems into operations, in addition to technology. Mm-hmm. To implement the goals of the national plan, interoperability coordinators were established in all 56 states and territories to develop statewide plans that were linked to the national plan. We have trained over 1,500 technical assistance visits and trained over 7,000 communications leaders and technicians to help implement the state plans.
Very cool.
We've worked with public safety this last couple years, and in 2014, November, we released the update to the plan. And from that, they are now updating all the other plans in the state. So we've updated 53 to date over the last year, and they're making great progress.
Terrific.
And it's a pleasure to be joined by Laurie Flaherty, who's representing 911, and Antwane Johnson.
Yeah, we got one heck of a panel here. We'll hear from. We hope to hear from everyone here. So I know a lot about that interoperability issue since I take credit for inventing wireless. By the way, I don't know if you guys know that, but remember my days at Secret Service. The way we did interoperability is we would put about 5 radios in the back of the car and say, if you want to talk to the FBI, talk to that one. If you want to talk to state, use this one. Whatever. So we've come a long way. Laurie Flaherty, can you give us some ideas, some of the progress you're making over with the 911 program?
Well, thanks, Jim, for having me here today. The 911 system is in the process of a huge upgrade. They're trying to catch up with the personal communications devices that you and I use every day.
Right.
And we are collecting data from the states on their progress. And to date, as of 2015, about between 25% and 35% of the states have put a digital internet-based infrastructure in place to process 911 calls. So that's progress. It's slow, but it is progress. About half the states don't have any of that infrastructure in place yet, but they're trying their best to do that.
Wow, terrific. Terrific. Great ideas. Ryan Gillis over Palo Alto, how do you guys play in this emergency communication space, and how are you supporting your customer base there?
Sure.
What progress are you making?
So I spent most of the last 15 years of my career on the other side of this public-private partnership. I come from DHS and National Security Council. Now with Palo Alto Networks, we spend a lot of time supporting the government's efforts as these evolutions go on within the 911 system, emergency communications, so new technology is leveraged so that first responders, individual citizens can leverage this technology either for response or for new information as disasters occur, whether natural disasters, terrorist or other things. We need to ensure the security and reliability of those networks. So our focus is inherent cybersecurity capabilities that we can contribute to the overall government and national effort.
Important issue, boy. We just Tom and I did a Chief Information Security Officer roundtable, and derived credentials and security of mobile devices was a big, big topic. Antwane Johnson over at FEMA, can you tell us a bit of progress you're making with in the area you're working in emergency communications?
Well, good afternoon, Jim, and thank you for having me on the show today. I think I'll start by just giving a little bit of history in that this whole concept of alert and warning goes back to 1951 with the establishment of the Control of Electromagnetic Radiation Program under the Truman administration.
Wow.
And has evolved over the last 65 years into what we have today with the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. And so I don't know if you've heard, but on Monday the President signed into law the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System Modernization Act, which, amongst other things, requires FEMA to modernize and implement IPAWs to ensure that federal, state, tribal, and local governments can alert the public in areas endangered by natural disasters, acts of terrorism, and other threats to public safety. And so that's really exciting for us within FEMA, and certainly for the citizens across this country, that this type of attention is being given to alert and warning.
Absolutely.
But one of the major things that we've done over the last 6 years since I've been at FEMA is to adopt the Common Alerting Protocol, which is an extensible markup language standard that was originally adopted by the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Systems. With that single move, we built out capability in the form of the IPAWS Open Platform for Emergency Networks, and over the last 4 years have connected 49 states to this system, 1/5 of the nation's counties. We have 2 territories as well as tribal governments connected into this, as well as 26,000 broadcasters, 61 cellular companies, 65 internet content providers. And I really take pride in the fact that organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are using the system to issue Amber Alerts and have attributed the recovery of 28 children to wireless emergency alerts or the receipt of this information over mobile devices. And of course, the National Weather Service is one of our largest users in issuing severe weather warnings to citizens across the country related to floods and tornadoes and things of that nature.
Cool.
So a lot of progress has been made over the last 65 years.
See, that's good. I'm glad you're here today, because I think a lot of people don't realize some of these things that FEMA is doing. And I guess when you think of emergency communications, people just think of the disasters, but all these other things you're doing on a day-to-day basis that are so important to the country. Patrick Flynn, tell us how Intel Security plays in this space and some of the progress you're making in supporting your customers.
I appreciate being invited, Jim. Thank you very much. You're at risk of becoming more known for being a radio show host than your prior government time, and I really do appreciate that. As you know, I'm a former Border Patrol agent. I really equate and really support public safety, generally speaking. As it relates to emergency communications, one of our primary concerns at Intel Security and Intel Corporation is making sure it's done securely. But at the same time, we have to measure that ability to securely protect the networks, whatever they are, from FirstNet to Next Gen 911 or your emergency response mechanisms. We want to make sure that it is secure, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it doesn't affect or create loss of life or anything like that. So that's what our primary focus is on. We've been very much in tune with it over the last 4 to 5 years. So it's very important.
Wow. Mr. McNulty, Mark McNulty over at Motorola. I go back a long ways with Motorola, having run Secret Service communications for years and years and having the privilege to travel around the world with a lot of your folks. But so I do understand a lot of what you're doing. But I guess when we think of emergency communications, I mean, Motorola is a key player there. Can you tell us about some of the progress you're making in supporting your customer base in this area?
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. So as you were talking about the 5 radios in the back of the car, and I was thinking about a conversation we had earlier with Admiral Hewitt, Really the role that we're playing at Motorola is really addressing user needs. Admiral Hewitt and I were talking about our recent public safety, our annual survey we do to understand what the needs are, what the folks out there, the practitioners, are thinking about every year. And what we hear from them is while there's certainly interest in broadband, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit about FirstNet today, there's also a renewed interest in making sure that they're modernizing and keeping current their existing LMR networks. So included in that is an effort to eliminate those 5 radios in the back of the car in order to achieve interoperability. So multiband radios, which DHS played a big role in many years ago, is obviously a direction that we've gone. And more important to that, not just multiband radios, but really standards-based, right, across industry, leveraging the P25 standard. Now as we start to talk about broadband, we'll talk about 3GPP and the standards that are coming out of there. But it's really taking those needs, working with others in industry and those in government on standards development and bringing those necessary technologies to our emergency responders.
Yeah, I'm getting big on standards too. For people, there's arguments back and forth, but there seems to be a lot of standards developing in a lot of different areas. And it seems to me we ought to just be embracing standards. The work's been done to create them. Why try to recreate things over and over again? We always like to ask on the show, can you cite a program or an example of something that you think is a success based on things you're doing? I'll start with Laurie. Laurie, can you name a specific program in your area that you're involved with that you think will have a big impact on improving the 911 program? I assume is clearly the big thing, right?
Well, the program that I manage exists for 3 reasons, and it exists, frankly, to support the folks that answer 911 calls.
Right.
And we do that in 3 ways. We act as a convener, so we coordinate all the public and private entities that support 911, whether they're at the local, state, or federal level. We also create or collect resources for the folks at the state and local level that actually operate the 911 system. And we administer a grant program specifically for 911. So the two things come to mind. We are anticipating receiving more funding for that grant program, the 911 grant program, and that exists specifically to help state and local governments make the leap to the updated infrastructure that we refer to as Next Generation 911, that will allow video and photographs to be received by 911 call centers and to allow that information to be transferred on to first responders. So that's huge. The second thing that I think we're working very hard to do is we are trying to make sure that we connect the dots, if you will, between the 911 folks and the other folks at the state level who have anything to do with emergency communications. Probably at this point, one of the most important groups are the points of contact for the FirstNet program,
right.
The establishment of a public safety broadband network. So it's really important that those folks are talking to each other, because at the end of the day, if they're not, we won't end up with a seamless emergency communications network.
The governance issue is going to be a mess.
Yeah, exactly.
Good
So we're working on those 2 things very hard.
Terrific. Antwane, you mentioned the Amber Alert program and National Weather Service. Is there other programs that you think are worth mentioning here today that you're working on, that you think will really make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. We have a number of partnerships with both industry and other public sector entities. But the one organization that I've gained a real appreciation for has been FEMA's Office of Disability Integration. Now, IPAWS allows public safety officials at all levels of government to send effective and reliable alerts and warnings to the whole community, including individuals with access and functional needs, as well as Americans with disabilities, older Americans, children, and those with a limited English proficiency. And we do that. And I think you may have heard the administrator in many of his talks talk about providing services to the whole of community, and that's what we're about. And so we engage with FEMA's Office of Disability Integration Coordination to foster a collaborative working relationship with numerous nonprofit and advocacy organizations to do 3 things. First, to shape policy and standards that effectively deliver accessible public alerts and warnings to people across the country. But secondly, to communicate access and functional needs requirements to industry and other alert and warning partners. And so it's exciting to be here in the presence of our industry partners today to discuss technology and standards and things of that nature that can be extended to our IPAWS efforts to make alerts and warnings more accessible. And then Third, we work with them to develop and promote standard symbology for alerts and warnings to help with bridging language and educational barriers.
Wow.
And so that's really exciting. In
Very-
addition
very
to
noble causes,
the
very noble
national
causes.
councils and things like that, but
Yeah.
that one helps us to maintain focus on the entire community of people across this
need to
country
think
who
of
require this
everyone.
information.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well done. Well said. Ron, tell me something really cool program that you're proud of.
Well, the Office of Emergency Communications is involved in a whole host of programs and services that support and improve emergency communications. In lines with governance, SAFECOM is our pinnacle governance structure that was formed after the terrorist attacks September 11, 2001, to improve public safety communications across the nation. It is represented by a broad representation of emergency responders, appointed elected officials, and includes intergovernmental and national public safety associations such as the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, APCO, international associations, chiefs of police, fire chiefs, and major city chiefs, metro fire chiefs, and National Sheriff's Association, just to name a few. And SAFECOM developed the interoperability continuum, which is a capability maturity model for assessing interoperability. States, tribes, regions all use it to assess their interoperability capabilities, and it's focused on 5 key areas: governance, standard operating procedures, technology, training and exercises, and usage. SAFECOM was also the primary driver behind the National Emergency Communications Plan, which was the first national plan that shows how to improve interoperability nationwide. And just recently they released the 2015 Emergency Communications Governance Guide for state, local, tribal, and territorial officials. It is the first national document that provides recommendations and best practices for all levels of government on how to establish, assess, and update governance structures that represent emergency communications.
Wow.
It really drives towards the implementation of the National Emergency Communications Plan. So
Very cool. A lot of stuff going on in your office that not readily obvious, but as you peel that onion back, you see there's an awful lot going on. Mark McNulty, tell me a program that you think's one that you're proud of to be supporting.
Well, a perfect springboard off of what the Admiral talked about. Motorola and DHS Office of Science and Technology recently entered into a cooperative research and development agreement where we are examining the needs of emergency responders and our first responders. A lot of that focus is around things like personal area networks around the responder. How do we integrate sensors, whether it's biohazard sensors, detectors on either the taser or the firearm that a police officer carries. How do we use those sensors and integrate them with either broadband networks and or LMR networks to bring intelligence back to the dispatch center and use analytics and those sensors to automate response.
Absolutely.
Heart rate monitor goes off. We know that an officer is probably in pursuit. We immediately send backup, right? A gun is pulled from a holster. We want to immediately send backup. How do we automate some of those things that today only get done if that first responder is able to reach up and key the mic and call for help? But how do we automate some of those things and bring technology to bear to make their jobs easier in the field?
That is really, really interesting endeavor. So I know the officers carry so much equipment now, and we're talking about cameras and we're talking about other devices, but if you can integrate them all and make it small enough so that they can still maneuver and do their job, I think that'd be very, very important. I want to hear from our other 2 industry guests on this same question too, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rear Admiral Hewitt from the Department of Homeland Security, Laurie Flaherty, Department of Transportation, Antwane Johnson from FEMA, Patrick Flynn from Intel Security, Mark McNulty from Motorola Solutions, and Ryan Gillis from Palo Alto Networks. We're talking emergency communications. When we went to break, we were talking about specific programs that we think are going to make a difference. We heard from many of our panelists, but we have not heard yet from Patrick Flynn over at Intel. Patrick, what would you cite as a program that you would sort of like hold up as one that you think is going to make a difference?
My favorite, and actually probably one of the most important to public safety, is FirstNet, and secondly, Next Gen 911. And there's a couple different reasons for that. Of course, from Intel Security's perspective, from a cyber point of view, we're real concerned in making sure that it's secure. And secure means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But more broadly speaking, from Intel's perspective, Internet of Things, and one of the things I want to cite is what Mark mentioned before with his work with dhs-oec on enabling situational awareness based on biosensors and stuff like that. There's a lot of pathfinding work at Intel relative to that form and function, enabling devices such as what Motorola is building and other companies are building in the silicon perspective. So it's one of the things that Intel takes very seriously, a standalone business unit for that, and public safety and the support of Band 14. And just one last thing on that, Band 14 is real important, obviously, to the 700 megahertz perspective and the spectrum enabling FirstNet. Intel is taking that seriously and creating silicon solutions that will support that band.
Cool.
Specifically.
Very cool. The Ryan Gillis, Palo Alto Networks. If I asked you to pick a program that you think is going to really make a difference, something come to mind?
Sure. It seems abstract, but planning and training and exercise. There's an old adage that is you're never supposed to exchange business cards during a crisis, and so we are involved with a range of training programs with the federal government, through DHS, through FEMA and others, to prevent where we can prevent against incidents and issues occurring, to envision things that can go wrong, to assume that things will always go wrong. The old Mike Tyson saying, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. To plan for the worst to potentially occur. And to make sure that we're leveraging all the national assets from the private and public sector side. We just recently participated in a national level exercise run by DHS, Cyberstorms, part of the broader effort to make sure that we as a nation are ready to bring all assets to bear.
Yeah, you need to practice makes perfect, and you need to do the training and the exercises, and if you want it to work. Let's talk about some lessons you're learning along the way here. Let's start with Antwane. What are some of the lessons you're learning to date as you work these programs through that might be useful to other colleagues in government industry as they work similar issues in their areas?
Thank you, Jim. And to piggyback off of what Ryan was saying, the whole governance issue, training and exercises is extremely important.
Sure. Just think of FirstNet. If something happens and everybody talks at the same time, we're going to have some issues. I mean, there has to be some discipline in there as to how this is going to work. I
totally agree. And the one additional thing that I will add is, as I've sat through a number of meetings with federal, state, and local government on the issue of interoperable communications, the one subject that I very rarely hear discussed is communication with the public. And that's kind of where I bring that issue to the table in terms of, we talk about interoperable communications among first responders and government at every level, but very rarely does the subject surface on how we communicate with the public that we're here to serve and protect. And so I would suggest that one of the lessons learned over the last few years is to include the public in our training and exercises. That's a lot of times we don't want to unnecessarily alarm them or involve them in some of the planning, but it's really important that they understand what these technologies consist of and how they're going to be used during emergencies or natural or man-made disasters. The one other thing that I would say as a lesson learned is that we need to have a very effective public information campaign to the public. And I know that I have a lot of work to do in that area because, say, for example, wireless emergency alerts were launched in 2012 in coordination with the FCC and the cellular industry. But we still receive reports from citizens today where they are wondering where that alert came from on their phone, who sent it, and what does it mean to them. And so we still have a lot of work to do in terms of informing the public about these technologies and how they will be utilized in their day-to-day activities as they encounter threats to their safety. So that's a real lesson learned for us because you can deploy all the great technology But if it's not being adopted, accepted, used, responded to in an appropriate manner,
Excellent point.
then we're not being as effective as we could be.
Excellent point. There's a lot of technologies I've seen in government and it's not being used just because no one has taken the time to learn how to use everything that's there. So unfortunately, but Ron, what are you learning along the way here? What's some lessons learned?
Well, Jim, you actually hit on one of the biggest lessons learned. Yeah,
All
you say,
right.
everybody wants to speak at the same time
That is
when
an
an
issue.
incident does
That is an
occur.
issue.
And unfortunately, the commercial networks become extremely congested to the point where I'm sure everybody's experienced that fast, busy signal or please try again your call later.
Right.
The lines are busy right now. Well, if you're an emergency responder, you can't take that.
Right.
So Office of Emergency Communications works with commercial carriers to provide national security and emergency preparedness users priority access services. And with that, the emergency responders that were responding just almost in 2013, the Boston Marathon incident bombing, those folks were able to get their calls through because of these services and save lives. So that's a huge
That is a
attribute.
big deal. I know if everyone tries talking at the same time, nobody, especially in this day and age where decision making is approaching time zero. I mean, things have to be decided immediately. Laurie, what do you think? What's some lessons you're learning as you work your way through this 911 national plan?
Well, the 911 folks are really undergoing a huge change due to the technology upgrade. Up until very recently, it really wasn't even possible for 911 call centers to transfer a call from one center to another. In fact, during Hurricane Katrina, there were 38 of those call centers taken completely out of operation, and those calls went nowhere.
Wow.
So now that they're putting this new infrastructure in place, next generation 911, it'll become possible for them to transfer calls among each other. But issues of consistency, uniformity become an issue in a way that they never were before. They had to be independent operations before, and now they need to collaborate, they need to coordinate, and that's a huge culture change for
Absolutely.
them. They're used to doing things their own way, used to making their own decisions. And I predict the folks who are, going to put the FirstNet network into place will undergo a similar change.
Right.
Because there's an awful lot of coordination that needs to happen among the law enforcement, fire, and EMS folks to make that network happen. So that's part of the reason why we're trying to make sure that the 911 folks are talking to the folks at FirstNet, because they could benefit from that experience. They've already gone through
Yeah.
a lot of those growing pains,
Absolutely.
and they could learn a lot from
Absolutely.
each other.
That makes a lot of sense. Just harmonizing across is so difficult to do.
Absolutely.
And then I'm glad you hit the word culture because this is 134th show. Somebody has brought up culture issues in every single show we've done. It usually comes up during the challenges question, but it is true, that there's a lot of things you can do, but people don't like change and have ways of doing things, and that becomes a real challenge. Patrick, what do you think are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here at Intel?
I think, from my perspective, is specifically around security, I'll start there, is the ability to implement good practices, good technology around specific solutions, especially, it doesn't matter whether or not it's a public safety network, FirstNet or NextGen 911, is to be able to implement security at the ground level. And as you build that architecture, being able to update that architecture at cyber speed, nanoseconds. Things happen very, very quickly, and be able to communicate throughout that entire network simultaneously with potentially millions of endpoints.
Yeah.
And that tangentially affects the acquisition process, because the folks running these programs, it doesn't matter whether or not it's FirstNet or 911, is how do you create the ability as a government entity to be able to acquire cyber technologies to properly protect those networks very, very quickly,
Right.
and avoid CapEx forklifts and so on and so forth. It really affects, radio communications too, because
Right.
that tends to get a little pricey sometimes for government agencies.
Well, you never really finish a cybersecurity
No, you
initiative
don't. That's a good
because,
point.
there's always more complex technologies being implemented, and the bad guys are trying to stay in front of the good guys. And so it's like a continuous process that you can never be complacent. Ryan Gillis, what do you think? What's some lessons learned along the way here?
So Admiral Hewitt's organization is born out of some of the most difficult lessons that we've learned from both 9/11 and
Yeah,
Katrina.
absolutely.
The 9/11 report focused on a failure of imagination. One of the things that we at Palo Alto Networks are focused on are the potential cyber vulnerabilities as we connect more and rely more on these new technologies, the cyber vulnerabilities that we need to protect against, prevent against, to ensure that we don't see the same type of impacts that we saw from natural disaster and terrorist attacks.
Yeah, excellent. You're right. Prior to planes being flown into buildings, we weren't imagining those kinds of possibilities. Now we need to use the imagination to just think out there of all kinds of things that we didn't think we had to worry about in the past, but we do. Mark McNulty, what are some of the lessons learned along the way? I would think Motorola's got a long, long history in this space.
We do, and many of them have been mentioned. Jim, you mentioned that cybersecurity is not a one-time event, right? It's constantly moving. Interoperability is much the same way. The Admiral talked about the updates to the plans.
Right.
Those updates are probably going to become more and more frequent as they account for new technologies that come on board for our emergency responders, whether it's NG 911, who's going to be dealing with text to 911, dealing with video from the public into the 911 centers. The ability to perhaps stream that video over a FirstNet-enabled network out to our emergency responders. So those interoperability plans and the exercises and the governance, all the things that have been mentioned here by the other panelists, are very important. I think the biggest thing is, how do we take those technology interoperability tools that public safety has today, and rather than being those one-time events when things are going really bad, how do we integrate them into the day-to-day operations of our public safety users?
Yeah, it makes me think. We just did a show on Internet of Things, and it's that same kind of thing too. As we move along, how do we interoperate, and how do these things become integrated into existing systems so that we don't have to have separate equipment for everything and so forth. So yeah, it's going to be exciting watching things roll out. Let's talk about some of the hard stuff, the challenges, some of the things that you need to overcome to get where you are. Let's start with Admiral Hewitt again. Ron, what do you think? What are some of the tough things, the challenges that you still need to overcome to get where you want to go?
Well, history has shown us that emergency responders must work together before events occur to develop plans, standard operating procedures, and then train and exercise to achieve interoperability. But unfortunately, the first thing cut in their budgets is training and exercises, so it makes it very difficult. So we've been working with public safety so that they can leverage their existing planned events, such as marathons, parades, and other sporting events, to be able to develop plans there that they can then use in their exercise during that disaster time. So that's been really paying great dividends. As you said, practice makes perfect.
Absolutely.
And if you can't come up with training plans, then you've got to use your planned events, and they support you in the unplanned events.
When I was in Secret Service, we didn't have someone tells you there's going to be a fire drill at 2 o'clock, so everyone will do the right thing and everyone will get it down. We actually had some exercises where I get called in the middle of the night and I did not know it was an exercise. That's when you really learn how things are going to go when you think it's real and you're being asked to respond. Laurie, what do you think? What are some of the challenges you face day to day that you still need to overcome to get to where you want to go?
Well, there are certainly technological challenges. We've talked about cybersecurity. All the applications that are being developed out there, need to be integrated, as you said, into the system in order to improve it rather than disrupt it, rather than circumvent it. But the longer I do this job, the more I think the technology will be the easy part.
Right.
The hard part is governance and the funding issues that goes with that. Yes, exactly. Because once you start talking about who's in charge or who's going to pay for it, the discussion gets interesting really fast.
I bet.
So we try to develop tools for the folks at the state and local levels. We've done model state plans. We've done templates for updating legislative language. We take our cue from them to help them develop the tools that they need to move their systems forward, both in terms of governance and some of the funding issues.
Right. Terrific. Great stuff. Antwane, what do you think? What are some of the challenges that you face day to day that you have to overcome to get where you want to be?
Well, I think Admiral Hewitt and Laurie have addressed the primary concerns being culture, training and exercises, resources, and in an era where there are limited resources that, or programs that are competing for these limited resources. But the governance one is one that has challenged us for the last 6 years with regards to strong governance and leadership.
Yeah.
That is really eating our lunch, especially as it relates to kind of cross-border events that take place. I mean, we all know that disasters and things like that have no respect for borders across the country, both between states and counties as well as with our neighbors to the north. And so that governance structure is very important to have that laid down and kind of worked out before any type of event occurs. The other one is the regulatory structure. That is a very lengthy process that we go through to adopt change within a number of the industries that we rely on to deliver these messages or this information to citizens across the country. And so that becomes quite the challenge, and that we can't be as fluid and as agile as the industry is in making technology available.
There are processes and rules and procedures that have to be checked off along the way.
Absolutely. So oftentimes we're just a little bit behind the curve when it comes to the advances in technology that add additional benefit to what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Excellent. Mark McNulty, what do you think? What are some of the challenges you face day to day that you still have to overcome to get where you want to go with all these programs?
So three quick thoughts there.
Sure.
One, I'd like to echo the need for training. I mean, let's face it, for our government agencies, it's an investment of time, talent, and treasure. All three of those things in very short supply, especially amongst our emergency responders. But I think it's imperative that they take the time and make the investments in people and funding to do that. I think from an industry perspective, there's probably two challenges. One is this increased presence of technology and use of technology by our emergency responders. The challenge for us is how do we make that simple and easy to use, right? And that's everything from the man-machine interface to how do we make it usable with gloved operation. How do we enable our public safety users who want to be hands-free, eyes up, yet integrate all this new technology that they have available to them. And then I think the third thing for us as industry that's a challenge is in that standards-based world, which we all support, but how do we continue to innovate and bring new capabilities and keeping in mind we've got to make it simple to use.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story when I was with Secret Service, and I think I was visiting Motorola, and we were fooling around with this new smart radio that had all these buttons on it and that did all these really cool things. I was an IT guy and a communication guy. I thought, man, this is really neat. I went back and I showed it to Ray Shattuck at the time, was the head of the president's detail, and he looked at it. I showed him all these buttons, all these things, and he threw it at me and he said, Jim, people are going to be shooting at me. You want me playing with all these buttons? My people are shooting. I want to push this button and I want it to work. That's your job. That's your requirement. So it did. I learned a quick lesson learned there about your point about making it simple and easy to use so that it can be used. Yeah, Patrick.
Real quick, and I know we're short before you have to break, but one of the things where it becomes very prevalent is ICAM. Being able to enable your public safety official, whoever they are, it could be a FEMA disaster response person or someone else for that matter, being able to authenticate automatically.
Right.
Just their presence alone authenticates them so they can remain eyes up, to use your term.
Yeah, very good point. Talked about that a little bit on our identity management show. I do want to hear from Patrick and Ryan on challenges too, but we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rear Admiral Ron Hewitt from Homeland Security, Laurie Flaherty from Department of Transportation, Antwane Johnson from FEMA, Patrick Flynn from Intel Security, Mark McNulty from Motorola Solutions, and Ryan Gillis from Palo Alto Networks. We're talking emergency communications. We've talked about progress and programs and lessons learned, and now we're talking a little bit about some of the challenges out there. Patrick, what do you see as some of the big challenges? I know you mentioned security at one point during the show. Is there anything else that you think you can add that you think needs to be overcome to get to where we need to go?
Well, I'm going to pile on the training, and making sure that public safety officials, disaster response officials have the appropriate resources to be able to train effectively, especially in a more modern, technologically based world. A couple different things that we see from at least my office is the government's ability to embrace the S&T environment, being able to embrace commercial off-the-shelf technologies. It applies not only to the cyber world, but in many, many different areas.
Sure.
The work, as Mark mentioned, on the S&T front is very, very important because we in industry move a lot quicker. We have to. That's how we make money. That's how we become more effective. And their ability to embrace that from a federal government perspective by enabling their S&T organizations, no matter where they're at in the federal government, to be able to do that effectively. It helps shape acquisition strategies, and it effectively makes you more secure, makes you more enabled to be able to perform more effectively and spend the taxpayers' money more wisely.
Right. I know that issue prevails all across government as generations of technology turn over quicker, and in government as certification, accreditation processes, things like that. By the time you certify and accredit one thing, you might be 2 generations behind already. So it's things have to change. Things are moving quick. Ryan Gillis, what do you think, Ryan, at Palo Alto? What are some of the challenges you think are out there that need to be overcome to really get to where we want to be with emergency communications?
So just the distributed nature of both responsibility and capability in these type of incidents is a real challenge. So from individuals to emergency responders to state and local level and the federal, as well as private sector. So the cybersecurity company such as ours relies on and needs to interoperate with the communication sector, needs to make sure that there's electricity flowing through the grid, or else that cybersecurity is not going to do much if there's no power flowing through the communication sector. So
very, very good points.
So that diffuse nature of all the different stakeholders and everybody needing to know what their job is, what their capabilities are, and how they can bring that to bear for to prevent against and respond to these type of incidents is a real challenge.
Yeah, the more you think about that, when I think Laurie brought it up, just the complexity of the governance process in all the states and the counties and the rules. I know when I worked for the governor, we first were going to talk about how we're going to distribute money to states and local governments and things like that through for Homeland Security, and they all came to town and we met with them, and it was like a major food fight, in terms of everybody. I'm a county and a municipality and whatever, and don't give the money to the state, give it direct to us, and this, that, and the other thing. So it's a nightmare trying to work through some of those kinds of issues. So I appreciate what you're all doing every day to try to address that stuff. We always end the show by talking about where we're going in the future, where this is. It's time to put on your look into the crystal ball and decide what this is all going to look like down the road, and how it might, what it'll mean to our country down the road as these programs go into play and become successful and so forth. So we're going to work our way right down the table here. We're going to start with Mark McNulty at Motorola. Mark, I would guess Motorola's thinking in the future all the time. I mean, to stay ahead of the curve and the competition, you need to always be thinking out to the future. What's it look like out there that you can talk about here today without giving away your proprietary secrets?
So, I talked earlier about the annual survey we do of our first responder, the public safety community, and both their growing and continued interest in broadband. They use lots of commercial networks today, as the Admiral talked about, with priority services on those networks. But also, the milestone event, the FirstNet RFP responses are due coming up in May, with award anticipated by the end of the year. So obviously that's a visionary thing that will be started many years ago and will finally become reality. We're on the doorstep of that. So from a vision perspective, we envision a FirstNet enabled world where new capabilities will be brought to emergency responders on a broadband network dedicated to their use. specifically built to provide that priority access to them when and where they need it. We envision, back to the results of the survey, the need to modernize and upgrade LMR networks as well. So we envision a world where those two technologies are used, at least during some transition period, as complementary technologies. And one of the things we're working on is how do we bring those two technologies together? How do we combine applications, things like presence, location and mapping, messaging across those two networks? So it really becomes a matter of putting the right device in the hands of the right user on the right network for them and the job that they're doing, but making sure that whether it's push-to-talk voice or text messaging between them, it doesn't matter which device they're using or which network they're on, they're able to interoperate with one another.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. It's kind of reminds me of today where there's an app for that. You're going to be able to add in whatever the capability you need, in very short order time. Patrick Flynn, what do you think? What's it look like down the road to you? What's your vision for where this is all going at Intel?
It's very dynamic, actually. I'll start first with security. We're integrating security solutions across the board, at the silicon level on many different platforms, both on the IoT front and also on the normal mobile front and PC computing. And, we're trying to touch everything. If it computes, we're trying to touch it both securely and from a power perspective. The things at larger Intel moving into the future vision is converging big data analytics and high performance computing, into one architecture. There we have some of our within the Intel structure. A fellow is probably one of the most respected ranks within Intel corporations, and we've got some of the best and brightest thinkers helping to converge that network, not only to bring the two architectures together, but to create a powerful platform so we can embrace big data analytics. And when we're talking about public safety, that becomes very important, especially in crime solving and disaster response and addressing terrorist threats. The final thing is, along the lines of IoT, we want to embrace IoT at all levels. It doesn't matter whether or not it's hanging on you or in your car or in a fire truck or an ambulance or a utility worker. So we want to be able to enable that and secure it, but also so it can communicate. We want to enable that chipset at the smallest level to directly communicate with the network. Normally you'd have to go through a Bluetooth device and have that linkage, but being able to enable Edison or Curry, some of our chipsets, to be able to communicate directly with the available network. That's pretty exciting, and that's the future.
Very cool. Very cool. Antwane, what's this look like to you down the road here, buddy?
Well, Patrick made some really interesting statements, and I kind of perked up just a bit when he was talking about the Internet of Things, because the technology that is being exploited and used in ways we hadn't envisioned 15 or 20 years ago. Sure. And I still believe that today we are limited by our own imaginations as to how technology can be used in a multitude of areas. But for the future, I think with competing needs for limited resources, I believe the government will be forced to be a little bit leaner, more collaborative at every level, and increasingly agile in order to maintain pace with technology advances. And so things like smart house technology that will turn common household appliances into alerting devices or wearable computers that monitor our activity and health will serve as user configurable devices for receipt of emergency information. Mesh networks, where I think is where Patrick was going, and the ability of devices or chips to communicate with one another in the absence of the traditional networks that we rely on today will become increasingly important. Vehicle-to-vehicle communication that allow cars to communicate with one another, and that kind of gets into some of the chip communication as well. But automated vehicles that will not allow its passengers to drive onto flooded flooded highways and things like that will be things that we can look forward to in the future. But the concept of all things on Earth being connected to the internet with some of the challenges of security and everything else will give true meaning to the idea of ubiquitous alerting, which is what we're looking forward to in terms of being able to provide information to people regardless of who they are, where they are, or what they may be doing is what we're looking forward to in the future.
Fantastic. Well said, Antwane. Ryan, at Palo Alto, what's it look like to you down the road?
Sure. So, we traditionally affiliate security with no, right? My IT guy says I can't check my personal email at work, that kind of thing. In this area, I think a corporate philosophy that we have is that security should really enable the user, and it needs to meet the needs of all the customer sets here. So whether it's FEMA trying to inform the public about an abduction and or a large-scale incident, whether it's National 911, and the ability for the general public to call in to first responders, or with first responders and the need for fire, EMS, and police to be able to talk to each other. Security needs to enable that to occur, and it needs to be done in a reliable way so that people know that what is being broadcast and what's being received is actually the truth and allows them to respond appropriately.
Excellent. Instead of no, it's I'll figure out a way to get it done.
Yes.
There are no constraints, just challenges. Laurie, what do you think? What's it look like down the road? Where's this all going?
Well, when I think about the future, I think not only about the technology, but I think about the people, because ultimately people have to decide how to use those technologies. And so how we work together is really important. One of the things that DHS has done is fostered the federal coordination through a group called the Emergency Communications Preparedness Center. It's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not a place. It's a group of the federal agencies that have anything to do with emergency communications.
Okay.
And that group has really done a lot to increase the amount of collaboration among the federal agencies. I can tell you that, I have the folks at the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau on speed dial. We have someone from Ron's office embedded into our office to figure out how to meld the programs together.
Wow.
And I think people would be pleased with, how much we're all going to benefit from reducing the redundancies and increasing the collaboration among the federal agencies. We've done a project with the Coast Guard. We're working with DOD on 911 issues for them. So there's, when I think about the future, I think about how we could work better together.
Yeah, very good. Very good points. Admiral Hewitt, what's it look like to you? What do you see the future down the road, and how will things change as these programs roll out?
Well, today across America, emergency communications is predominantly mission-critical voice. A citizen is not able to send a picture or a video clip to their 911 center, nor is that capability available through the emergency alerting system. But with all of us working together, we'll be able to deliver next generation 911, the nationwide public safety broadband network, and next generation alert and warning systems that are going to be interoperable and be able to work together in accordance with the goals and objectives of the 2014 National Emergency Communications Plan. So that a citizen will be able to send a picture of their loved one who's missing to their 911 center that could easily go out right through the nationwide public safety broadband network to all the public safety officials in that area, and then again could go out to the citizens being the alert and warning system, so that missing person could be found much quicker. Or a citizen that's getting on at a bus stop or a metro stop and sees someone with a suspicious package, leaving it behind, they could take that picture of the person in the picture and actually send it to the 911 center, and it could go out to public safety. They could investigate, and if they have to, they can go out through the emergency alerting system and warn people to evacuate. The nation could become, America become much safer and secure if we work together to deliver these things so that all emergency communications for public safety is interoperable so they're able to do their job and to be able to go forward.
Fantastic. Some great stuff, folks. It's really, really good stuff here. Let me try to attempt to summarize some of the important points we heard here today. When we were talking progress, we heard about a lot of interoperability progress going on compared. We've come a long way since I was putting all those radios in the back of the car. And I guess as you see the police car go by, there's a few less antennas on them as the years go by. We talked a little bit about standards and the fact that there are some standards out there which can help get things done and make improve progress, and a lot of talk about security improvements and things that have to be done, building security in there first. Programs, we had the obvious, the 911, which we talked about quite a bit, and Laurie laid out here for us. We talked about a lot of grants that are also going on to support the program. Antwane brought up about addressing things like disabled and being able to make these programs available to everyone so that no one's left out. We heard about Amber Alerts being a big part of the emergency communication programs and the National Weather Service. SafeCom and, of course, FirstNet were listed as key program areas that are going to make a big difference, are making a difference with FirstNet, will make a big difference down the road. Lessons, a couple things that resonated with me. I wrote down is the importance of communicating with the public and getting the public involved in these programs, you know, the transparency kinds of things and issues we're talking about, and a need for a campaign with the public so the public can understand what's happening and what's being done. I heard a lot about governance and priority access, and that if the governance issues aren't addressed up front, we could have some chaos down the road. So it's going to be very important to get governance in place up front. Challenges, I heard we need to practice, train. I heard funding issues, which we know, the culture word as enters the equation, the complexity and the need to simplify things so that it's not too things are easy to do. And we heard about the challenges with the distributed nature of the things that are going on. When we talked about future, what I heard was FirstNet being a major play there. It's being held up to be something that people are looking down the road to do big things. We heard about getting the right capabilities to the right people at the right time and the need for integration of equipment. And I guess after I listened to Rear Admiral Hewitt here, it dawned on me that the real future in what this is all about is about saving lives. That's what it's really about in securing our country for ourselves and the generations that follow us. When you boil it all down, all the work you're doing is for a very noble cause, and that is people and the saving of lives. With that, I want to thank our panelists for taking time from your busy schedules to be here. I know you all have very important jobs, and it's nice that you came out to spend time with us and tell your stories. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio that always make this a fun thing to do. And of course, most importantly, I want to thank our listening audience that tunes in and each month listens to the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.